22 years ago, in one of those hot, stifling Queens summers when the sidewalk literally glowed, a young woman named Amanda Pierce disappeared into thin air. She was only 22, wrapping up her hotel job as usual. Then, nothing. She didn't make it home. Police initially suspected her former boyfriend and a male colleague. But no body, no evidence, there wasn't much they could do. The case went cold quickly. Nevertheless, Amanda's parents did not let her memory disappear. Each year in July, they lit candles in her memory, clinging to the tiniest glimmer of hope that one day, somehow, the truth would rise to the top. And then it did. A shocking find in Forest Park uncovered a detail that everyone had overlooked. A clue so significant that it sent shockwaves through the entire Queens community and completely flipped everything that people believed they knew about the case. Before we dive into this amazing tale, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you like stories that reveal long-lost secrets, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. It was the 18th of July, 2003, and Queens, New York was shrouded in the type of humid summer heat that makes the night air feel weighed down. Streets still radiated warmth after a rain that fell late at night. Neon signs from diners and bodegas glowed off the wet sidewalk, illuminating the city with its usual urgent sheen. In a compact hotel in Midtown Manhattan, Amanda Pierce was ending her shift behind the desk. She had spent the day greeting visitors with her customary friendliness, handling phone calls and paperwork with smooth efficiency. Her colleagues enjoyed having her around. She was courteous, dependable, always unruffled. At 9:30 p.m., she logged off, cleaned her desk, and placed the off-duty sign. Her brown hair was pulled smartly back, her white uniform freshly pressed after a long day's work. Purse over shoulder, she headed out into the evening. Before heading to the subway, Amanda pulled out her silver Nokia phone, remember those, and called her mom. It was 9:45. Amid the rush of traffic, she said simply, "I'm on my way home." Her mother smiled, relieved to hear her voice, unaware it would be the last time she ever would. Queensboro Plaza Station was full that evening. Hurried commuters rushed up and down. Helicopters flew by, their lights slicing through the hot air like vigilant eyes. People hardly slept as they mourned rooftops and treetops with beams, lighting up the still city. Yet despite all that, the river remained still. The night was quiet. In Forest Hills, there were dozens of officers spreading out in lines. Flashlights pierced the darkness under old oaks and thick undergrowth. The park, teeming with joggers and strollers at other times, had become a rigid crime scene. Each was examined with care and tested, but none of them belonged to Amanda. At adjacent lots, police opened with crowbars the rusty doors of junk cars, flashlights into dusty interiors looking for blood, hair, anything. Again, nothing. It was as if Amanda had been devoured by the city. Meanwhile, the story went mad in the media. Amanda's photograph, her sweet smile set off by that tidy brown hair, was ubiquitous. Local television newscasts broadcast tearful reports, "Missing young woman in Queens." News teams swarmed outside the Pierce family apartment, holding out microphones as Amanda's mother, her voice shaking, beseeched through sobs, "If somebody has any information, please, come forward. My daughter can't just disappear." The days ran together, search lines trundling slowly along city parks, helicopters hovering endlessly, and the Pierce family standing outside the precinct, their hope wearing thinner by the hour. No blood, no possessions, no witnesses. Amanda had just vanished. By the fourth day, frustration overcame the press. Headlines became more brazen, pressure rose from the public. Within the 114th precinct, the atmosphere was somber. Detectives huddled shoulder to shoulder in a small conference room, stacks of coffee cups, knowing that each passing minute brought no progress, only made them worse off. 7 days since Amanda went missing, the tension escalating to its height, a glimmer of hope was received, and soon, terror. A Forest Hills resident called police, reporting a woman's wallet found in a neglected parking lot. Officers arrived fast, scanning the ground until they spotted it, half buried in leaves and debris. Inside the worn leather wallet were Amanda's ID and hotel employee card. Strangely, the cash was still there. Robbery was off the table. The region was quickly taped off. While officers searched the lot, one halted briefly beside a dented garbage can. There, partially hidden, the NYPD started searching records of convicted offenders around Forest Hills, guys with pasts for assault, stalking, or harassment around subway stops. It was a long list, but no solid match. The grainy CCTV photo taunted them from the evidence board, a faceless phantom that would not relinquish its name. The formal case report for the day was evidence discovered: unbroken wallet, splattered hotel uniform, video of victim with unknown man. Case reclassified: probable abduction and assault. This was not the tale of a missing woman anymore. It was now a tale of a predator in plain sight. Lead investigator detective Laura Chen re-interviewed everyone in Amanda's life. One name stood out: Eric Dalton, Amanda's ex-boyfriend. They'd split months before, but acquaintances characterized Dalton as hot-headed and controlling. A fellow employee remembered him lingering around the lobby of the hotel long after Amanda's workday ended, just staring at her. His rap sheet wasn't clean either. Bar brawls, a fight on the street, a history of violence. Police brought him in, and Dalton came in bad-tempered. "I didn't do anything," he growled. Pressed for where he was on July 18th, he said he'd been in Long Island, attending a baseball game with friends. Chen demanded evidence. Dalton produced a ticket stub and identified his friends. The investigators investigated. Stadium security tapes and phone records corroborated his account. His alibi was impenetrable. Nevertheless, his aggressive tone and chilly demeanor unnerved the team. In the case file, Chen jotted, "Alibi seems solid. Keep surveillance." Dalton walked free, but his name remained on the watch list. Police then targeted Victor Ramirez, a coworker of Amanda's at the hotel. Ramirez was in his 30s and had no criminal record, but rumors of inappropriate behavior on the job circulated. Another woman had once accused him of harassment, but nothing was ever done. Since she disappeared immediately after her shift, police couldn't but overlook him. When questioned, Ramirez looked shaken. "I'd never hurt Amanda," he said, voice trembling. He told detectives he'd worked from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. that night. Hotel security footage confirmed it. He was visible at the front desk at 9:45, the same time Amanda called her mother. Coworkers backed his story. Chen sighed. Another solid alibi. With both Dalton and Ramirez cleared, frustration came over the team. Male DNA on victim's shirt does not match known suspects. Current technology inadequate to make identification. Case stalled, and the case ground to a halt. The promising shirt, everybody's hope for cracking the case and bringing Amanda home, had become an emblem of limitation. Sealed in an evidence freezer, just waiting for technology to catch up. Detective Chen and her team had come up against the edge of truth, but the door remained firmly shut. Months passed. Leads dripped in, one worse than the next. Individuals reported seeing Amanda in subway stations, public parks, even Atlantic City, but each sighting concluded the same: false alarm. The CCTV footage wasn't more revealing than it was. The only eyewitness remembered only a tall man in gray. By the 6-month point, with resources at a thin point, Chen fought to expand the search beyond Queens, but the department was overwhelmed. Other cases were pressing in on it. 6 months to the day that Amanda had disappeared, a heart-wrenching decision was made. The case would be sent to the NYPD Cold Case Squad. A manila file, thick as a phone book, held it all together: photos, witness statements, the wallet, the stained shirt, and a printout of that spooky CCTV clip. When the officers boxed it up to store it, the precinct was empty. "We had it in our hands," one of the detectives grumbled, "and let it get away." But there was nothing else to do. For the Pierce family, that transfer was another painful blow. Yet they would not yield to silence. They started having candlelight vigils every July by Queensboro Plaza, the site where Amanda was last spotted. Neighbors gathered, holding pictures of Amanda's smiling face, their candles leaving wax streamers on the pavement. Her mother addressed the local news cameras each year in a soft voice. "If we stop, Amanda will be forgotten. I can't let that happen." But still, no matter how hard she pushed, Amanda's name slipped quietly off NYPD's end-of-year lists, another file in the unsolved pile. Years went by, and Queens forgot. The fear disappeared from the front pages, but in the Pierce house, it never dissipated. Amanda's chair remained empty. Each fresh candle lit was a silent vow that one day the truth would come out. Years went by. 2013, Amanda Pierce's. As months went by, Amanda's file slipped again to the bottom of the cold case pile, lost beneath newer tragedies. But Detective Chen could not set it aside. Every time she walked past the storage room, her eyes caught that one box labeled in worn-out black letters, "Pierce, Amanda, 2003. Some evenings she'd linger a moment too long. She had no doubt whatsoever that someday science would catch up, and when it did, Amanda's voice would be heard once more. Until then, Chen knew her role clearly: maintain the hope alive, even in the darkest recesses of the squad. Then May 2019 arrived, 16 years since Amanda disappeared. Forest Park, searched and combed over countless times, was quiet again until one humid afternoon when a city work crew began digging near an old water pipeline. A worker's shovel struck something solid. Thinking it was just debris, he knelt to brush it aside. But as the damp earth gave way, a corner of rotted burlap appeared. Inside, something pale, something shaped like bone. The man froze. Then he called for help. In the hour that followed, the clearing was filled. Yellow tape billowed in the wind, police radios spat, and officers worked quietly under the trees. The engraving was weak but unmistakable: Amanda. Nobody required a test to be aware. Word traveled in Queens like fire. Cameras ringed the park entrance, and folks congregated, some sobbing, others muttering prayers. For a city that had forgotten for so long, Amanda's name meant something once more. Forensic specialists worked throughout the night in the lab, matching the bones and teeth with saved hair samples since 2003. 68 anxious hours later, the test results were in. The remains were those of Amanda Pierce. When her family was summoned, her mother fainted in the waiting room, eyes hollow, dry of tears after all those years. Her father, shaking, gripped his son's hand and said, under his breath, "At least we know where she is." It was an agonizing piece. The forensic report brought the remainder of the truth. Amanda's neck vertebrae revealed fractures typical of strangulation. The time of death correlated with her 2003 disappearance. There were no bullet wounds, no defensive wounds, just signs of a quick, calculated killing. For the Pierce family, it was another twist of emotions. Relief that Amanda's friends weren't guilty, but pain that the actual killer was still out there, faceless and anonymous. Amanda's father hunched forward in the precinct's conference room, his voice shaking. "So who is he, Detective? How much longer do we have to wait?" Detective Laura Chen looked at him. "As long as it takes," she replied. Technology's come a long way since 2003, and this time we're going further. That further arrived in the shape of Orem Laboratories, a state-of-the-art DNA analysis lab in Texas, famous for cracking cold cases previously thought unsolvable. The vote was unanimous. Send the unidentified male DNA to Orem for genetic genealogy testing. Chen was in charge of every detail. The sample, precisely sealed inside a temperature-controlled envelope, was ready to ship. Before she closed the evidence box, she stopped. She had held Amanda's bloody shirt 16 years ago, marking her report male unidentified. Now she made a new notation on the record, sent to Orem. Final hope. As the evidence was sent to Texas, the atmosphere in the precinct was somber but optimistic. A young cop muttered, "If this doesn't work, it might never." No one replied, but they all knew. That evening, as local television stations broadcast the news, NYPD submits cold case DNA to federal laboratory for state-of-the-art testing. Queens sprang to life once more with Amanda's name. Candles were lit on the corner where she was last spotted. Strangers prayed. Families whispered. In a Texas laboratory somewhere, a secret that had been waiting 16 years was finally about to collide with science. At Orem's facility, Amanda's and the unknown male's DNA were received with high security. Under the glow of sterile fluorescent lights, technicians got to work, extracting, amplifying, and decoding every fragile genetic strand. Days turned into weeks. Then, one afternoon, as a computer monitor filled with long lines of data, a lab tech leaned back and exhaled. "We've got him. His full profile." For the first time, the gray man was not a ghost on a CCTV snapshot. He had a full genetic profile, a code that would now ultimately identify him by a name. Orem's team proceeded to the next step, uploading the DNA to commercial genealogy databases such as GED. On a Saturday evening, after Michael had drunk 3 beers and stumbled out of his favorite pub, an undercover cop swooped in, grabbed the foamy can with gloved fingers, and tucked it away inside an evidence bag. It was whisked to the NYPD's crime lab before dawn. The following days were strained. Everyone understood the risk. If the DNA did not match, the entire genealogy trail, all that work, would fall apart. Then, in a secret briefing room at the 114th precinct, a forensic analyst turned down the lights and displayed 2 DNA sequences on the screen. One from Amanda's bones and t-shirt, the other from the beer can. The lines were identical. Probability 99.99%. Silence filled the room until Detective Chen finally exhaled. "We've got him." After 16 long years, the man in gray had a name, an age, and a face. Michael Coleman wasn't just a shadowy figure from a grainy CCTV clip. He was flesh and blood, living freely in the same city where Amanda had vanished. The cold case squad pulled every page of Coleman's file. It sounded like a sad syndrome: violence, harassment, intimidation, and yet no long-term punishment. There was an arrest for a bar fight in 1998, a complaint of assault in 2001 by his ex-wife, who later recanted her statement. In 2005, a fellow employee accused him of harassment at a plumbing firm. Each time the result was the same: probation, community service, modest fines, and Coleman resumed his old habits right away. Next came another connection: bar witnesses near Amanda's hotel. Some of the staff recalled a tall guy wearing a tattered gray jacket who loitered, keeping an eye on the street from the corner. Nobody gave it much thought at the time, but when detectives took them a recent picture of Michael Coleman, heads started to nod. "Shut up, he's right there," another bartender spoke up. "Drank cheap beer. Avril smoked incessantly." It was starting to make sense. Coleman had presumably stalked Amanda, familiarizing himself with her routine. On the night she went missing, he had no alibi. Records indicated that he was alone in a rundown Forest Hills apartment less than 2 miles from Forest Park, where Amanda's body was discovered. His phone was quiet that evening. No calls, no texts. The city was half asleep yet, a chill drizzle seeping through the cracks in old windows. Under gray light, SWAT police in bullet-resistant vests made their way to the old brick building. Boots stepped quietly on damp pavement. A command van waited nearby, engine turned off, lights low. Detective Chen waited outside with the operation commander, checking her watch. With the second hand striking 0, the radio burst into life. "Go, go, go!" Boots pounded up the stairs. A steel battering ram broke the apartment door. The interior was dim and dirty, beer cans on the floor, plumbing equipment spread out on a table, gray jackets hanging over a chair. Michael Coleman leapt out of his couch, his eyes bloodshot, stricken in amazement as SWAT officers brought him down. Detective Chen's voice rose above the commotion. Coleman fought, crying, "You've got the wrong man. I didn't do it." But the cuffs snapped shut. Outside in the corridor, neighbors poked their heads out from behind doors, faces pale. "Oh my God," an elderly woman across the hall exclaimed. "He lived here all these years?" Another neighbor whispered, "I had him fix my sink last summer." The formerly quiet building hummed with shock. As Coleman was escorted out by officers, the press had already convened. Camera flashes burst like lightning. The reporters yelled above sirens, "Michael, did you murder Amanda Pierce? Why'd you do that? 16 years, Michael. Where were you in hiding?" Coleman had his head down, handcuffed and shaking in his disheveled pajamas. His face appeared everywhere in hours. Queen's cold case cracked after 16 years. Television news anchors used serious tones. NYPD has arrested 44-year-old Michael Coleman, the prime suspect, in the 2003 murder of Amanda Pierce, a case that has haunted Queens for nearly 2 decades. Back in Flushing, at the Pierce family's small apartment, the news broke. And when it did, the emotions hit like a tidal wave. Amanda's father gripped his wife's trembling hand, his voice breaking. Finally, they got him. Her mother cried openly, a combination of shock and welcome relief sweeping over her. The moment she had prayed for, nearly 20 years in the making, finally came. Friends and neighbors stopped by the Pierce household, delivering hugs and poignant words. Yes, justice was finally moving, but could never bring Amanda back. Yet having her murderer behind bars removed a weight that had clouded their lives for 16 years. Throughout NYPD, the news spread like an electric spark of vindication. Retired detectives who had worked the case years ago phoned in. One of them, voice choked with emotion, said, "We didn't think that day would ever arrive." Detective Laura Chen, sleep-deprived and unfocused, sat at her desk gazing at Amanda's beaming picture. She spoke softly. "We held true to our word, Amanda. 16 years later, we did. The spectral haze of that 2003 CCTV, the gray man was at last named Michael Coleman. Not a supervillain, but a regular plumber who had lived his life in New York as his victim was buried under Forest Park. But Chen knew there was more to it. The courtroom would be the next arena, and the reality of that summer evening in 2003 still held secrets yet to be revealed. Following his arrest, Michael Coleman was led to a sterile interrogation room at the 114th Precinct, gray walls, brutal fluorescent lighting. Chen stiffened, then nodded slightly to her partner. The camera continued to roll, each syllable captured. Coleman caught himself and closed up. But it was too late. That one admission, however slight, was all it took. He just implicated himself in what Chen already suspected. He had been with Amanda that evening, and her killing was no accident. When the interrogation concluded, officers took him to a holding cell. The tape, safely kept, was one of the most compelling bits of evidence in the case. Chen remained behind, alone in the darkened interrogation room. 16 years of running on shadows, and at last, the wall of silence had been breached. Justice had found its chink, but she wasn't finished. That little admission had to be supported by irrefutable proof. She instructed the cold case unit to reconstruct Amanda's last night step by step, minute by minute, clue by clue, and connect it, without doubt, to Michael Coleman. The group went back to the 2003 Queensboro Plaza CCTV. Grainy, but it showed a man with a wide build, a gait left leg favored slightly, a lopsided shoulder bag. Those patterns were matched with undercover videos taken in recent days of Coleman emerging from a Brooklyn bar. The findings were chilling. The walk was the same left foot placement, same rhythm. It's a near-unique marker, one analyst concluded. The squad reconstructed Amanda's last movements, 9:30 p.m. She left the hotel. 9:45 p.m. Called her mother, saying she was heading home. 9:55 p.m. CCTV captured her walking with the man in gray. 15 minutes later, K9 units had lost her scent near the station's north exit, the same direction as Forest Hills, where Coleman lived at the time. There was a big map draped over the table. Red lines mapped Amanda's final route from Queensboro Plaza to Coleman's 2003 building, then on to Forest Park. The distance? A mere 2 miles, 10 minutes by car, 30 on foot. Chen traced the path with a confident hand. This was his course. Met Amanda at the station, drew her out or pushed her. Then took her to Forest Park, where he killed her and buried her in that bag. The room was silent. Everyone knew this was the last piece of the puzzle. To close the case forever, Chen instructed a final action: re-interview the burlap sack that had contained Amanda's body. They recalled Coleman loitering by that bar in 2002-2003, never with anyone else, fixed stare out on the street. One of the bartenders even remembered him asking about the young receptionist when she got off work. Those little recollections sewed together a more cohesive timeline. He'd observed, discovered her pattern, and waited. At a closed briefing in the 114th Precinct, Detective Laura Chen presented the case to commanders and the Queen's DA. On screen unfolded the pieces: the blurry 2003 CCTV of the gray-clad man, the splattered uniform shirt stained with blood, the chart indicating a full DNA match between crime scene evidence and Coleman's aborted beer can, and a map connecting his former apartment to Forest Park. Chen's voice was calm. Each piece falls into place. This is no longer a hypothesis. This is the truth. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what those words signified. After 16 years, Justice's path had finally appeared. The prosecutor signed off on an application for an arrest warrant. Within days, it was approved by a judge. Michael Coleman was officially charged with second-degree murder. But Chen and the team understood that an arrest would have to be approached with caution. Coleman was violent, had a van filled with equipment, and was known for having a hot temper. Precision would be required for the operation. Undercover detectives had already mapped his habits: pre-dawn plumbing jobs, after dark bar visits, quiet nights alone in a crummy Flatbush apartment. Neighbors characterized him as explosive. The SWAT unit and the cold case. For 6 endless hours, Chen interrogated him. Where did you and Amanda meet? Why is your DNA on her jacket? What were you doing in Forest Park that evening? He stonewalled, dodged, remained silent. Time dragged. It was well after 3 in the morning when, in a gasping whisper, Coleman exclaimed, "I didn't mean to kill her." The words dropped like a stone. Chen's partner cued. All the recorders caught the slip. Coleman shut up after that, seeming to regret what he'd uttered. But the confession was out, and with the DNA and other evidence, it counted. He was led to a holding cell. The tape of his statement became the key piece of the prosecution's puzzle. Chen next demanded a complete rebuilding of Amanda's last night, set on linking Coleman to not just the DNA, but to time and place and actions. They went back to the 2003 CCTV footage. While grainy, the man's walk was distinctive, broad-shouldered, with a limp in his left leg, with an uneven shoulder bag. Behavioral experts contrasted that with more recent undercover video of Coleman exiting a bar. The games were chilling: the identical left-footed angle, the identical limp.
The analyst referred to it as a near-unique personal marker. The team reworked the timeline. Amanda departed the hotel at 9:30 p.m., called her mom at 9:45 p.m., and appeared on CCTV at Queensboro Plaza at 9:55 p.m. The K9s lost her at the station's north exit, a path to Forest Hills and Coleman's 2003 apartment.
A red line on a large map tied the dots together. Station, Coleman's former flat forest park. The path had been only 2 miles, a 10-minute drive. Fibers contained grease stains typical of plumbing work, the same type of grease they found on seized tools from Coleman's apartment. Circumstantial, perhaps, but another strand weaving the evidence together. Old files surfaced as well, a 2003 police report from a woman who'd complained that a middle-aged man wearing a gray jacket had followed her from Queensboro Plaza. She hadn't been assaulted, so the report went nowhere. Now, when she was shown Coleman's picture, she picked out a face much like his. It wasn't conclusive evidence, but it accounted for behavior patterns, stalking, selection, routine. Chen brought geography to the forefront. Coleman's 2003 apartment was along a secluded path from the station to the park, a route that eschewed sunlit, crowded streets, perfect for a guy who wanted to get by incognito. A seasoned cop boiled it down. He did not choose the location by accident. He understood the surroundings. He knew how to go and where to disappear.
Submitted to the prosecutor, all the pieces fell into place like falling dominoes: the CCTV gate and gate analysis, the DNA match, the geographic connection, the grease on fibers indicating plumbing activity, the witness memories, and the gap in Coleman's 2003 movements.
DNA is the coup de grace, the prosecutor said, but the overall context makes the case unshakably robust. Someone might try contamination, but the chain of custody is bulletproof. Quote, "The restored route and supportive evidence make the narrative coherent and compelling. For the Pierce family, beholding the map with that red line was scarcely endurable. The father's hand shook as it brushed past the Forest Park marker. This was the way she went, he breathed. The mother wept, but under the sorrow lay relief. The vagueness had turned into clarity. The shadow had been named. With the path rebuilt and the evidence amassed, Chen forwarded the file to the Queen's DA. The prosecutor, experienced in cold case prosecutions, had learned that tiny gaps could unravel months of effort. The DA's war room was crowded with boxes, the bloodstained shirt, Amanda's bracelet, the rot-stained sack, and piles of DNA and forensic reports. For hours they worked on the story, rehearsing how they would offer not only tough science, but a human narrative. Amanda, 22, on a sweltering July evening, walking home and disappearing into the grasp of a man who had stalked her for weeks. The Pierce family stepped out quietly, flanked by officers. They lingered at the foot of the courthouse steps. Amanda's father, Richard Pierce, held aloft his daughter's picture frame for the cameras and spoke softly but insistently. She was 22, just starting out in life. Today, she can finally rest. His wife chimed in, crying, "No family should have to wait this long for the truth. Never give up." Detective Laura Chen stood aside, drained but beaming. Reporters shouted for her attention, asking her how it was to solve the case after 16 years. She merely stated, "We told the Pierce family we wouldn't give up." Science delivered on that promise. The next day, all the big papers had Amanda's story. Her smiling face appeared alongside Coleman's mugshot and Chen's forensic board, red strings, and case files now infamous as tokens of determination. Coleman stood, face impassive, as the judge took the stand to say, "Michael Coleman, your conduct took the life of a young woman and brought peace to a family for 16 years. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without chance of parole." A weak sigh ran through the gallery. The Pierce family clasped hands, silent tears streaming. As Coleman was taken away, the mother breathed softly into Chen. You gave her back her voice. Outside, autumn leaves scattered across the courthouse steps, a quiet end to a storm that had lasted nearly 2 decades. For Queens, for the Pierce family, and for the detectives who never gave up, justice had spoken at last. Sobs filled the courtroom. Amanda Pierce's mother clutched her daughter's photo, tears streaming down her face. Her husband gripped her trembling hand, eyes shining with both grief and relief. The judge's gavel came down hard. Michael Coleman, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment with no chance of parole. You will live out the rest of your life in a New York State prison. Court is adjourned. That echo, the last clang of the gavel, brought to an end 16 long years of suffering. Coleman stood motionless for an instant, his head hung low, shoulders weighted with defeat. Then officers moved forward, handcuffed his wrists, and took him away. For the first time, he didn't struggle. He simply walked, silently embracing the destiny he'd evaded for almost 20 years. Headlines burst outside the city. Television screens replayed shots of Coleman's escort from the courthouse, intercutting those shots with shots of Queens citizens lighting candles outside Queensboro Plaza, the same location where Amanda was last seen. Queens was shocked and oddly relieved, shocked that her murderer had been living among them all these years, relieved that finally the truth was out. In the Pierce family's Flushing apartment, a somber memorial dominated the living room. Amanda's beaming photo rested on a table amidst white flowers and burning candles. Her father spoke softly, voice cracking. Justice came late, but it came. Our girl can finally rest. Her mother, grasping their son's hand, whispered softly, Amanda's finally heard. For Detective Laura Chen, the guilty verdict shut down one of the most ghostly odysseys of her career. Standing outside the courthouse surrounded by flashing cameras and reporters, she remembered Amanda's case file 16 years before. It had read mail, unidentified. Today, that name had a face, and that man would never walk free again. Queens rallied in the following days to pay tribute to Amanda. Individuals brought her photograph with them to vigils and memorials. To them, she was not just a victim, she was a beacon of unrelenting justice. Media sources referred to the case as evidence of two things: the force of forensic science and the undying resolve of families that never give up fighting for truth. As Queensboro Plaza candles flickered, it was whispered that the shadow from that sweltering summer evening of 2003 had at last dissipated. Amanda Pierce's tale and the 16-year struggle to convict Michael Coleman is a painful but encouraging reminder of what can